Hey, what is up guys? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Dylan and today we're going to talk a little bit more about The Legend of Zelda. Obviously earlier this week we had the 10-minute gameplay showcase for Tears of the Kingdom, and I feel anytime you get new gaming content, information, or even if a whole game drops, the healthiest thing to do is immediately ask the question, well, what's next? So that's what we're going to do here today. So to specify, I thought it would be fun to ask the question to you guys on Twitter, what should or what would you want Nintendo to do with the next entry after Tears of the Kingdom? Should Nintendo go back to the more traditional linear style of Zelda or continue to expand on the open world ideas that they've already established with Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom? And I thought this would be a fun conversation because Zelda does have the unique ability to come in many different shapes and sizes. Of course, most broadly, you have your 2D top-down Zeldas, a 3D kind of linear dungeon crawler, and then your open world adventures. And you really don't see that kind of flexibility with any Sony or Microsoft IPs. Really, I think Nintendo kind of hit the gold mine with that because they have several franchises that can do this. But to get back to the main topic, I did take to Twitter and I posted this poll here, and I asked, after Tears of the Kingdom, should Nintendo go back to the more traditional linear format or continue to expand on open world possibilities? Remakes of past games don't count. And I did want to specify that last line because, of course, we have Twilight Princess and Wind Waker HD Switch port rumors floating around. And so, if you really believe those rumors, you're probably going to say, oh, well, yes, the next Zelda in line will be a traditional style because it's going to be a remake of an older game. So I wanted to specify remakes of past games do not count. And as you can see, we did get 19 votes on this poll, which, hey, I think that's pretty good. That's probably a higher number than Mario Striker's active player count. But in all seriousness, for anyone who did vote on the poll, I do appreciate it. It doesn't have to be 25,000 votes in order to see a trend here. And obviously, we are seeing 68.4% want open world and 31.6% would like the traditional style. So, the open world option won by a pretty large margin, and I think that's totally fair. One thing, the hype for open world Zelda is probably at its peak right now, just now coming off of the Tears of the Kingdom gameplay reveal. So, that may have had an effect a little bit. Whereas us more, classic fans do have great love and nostalgia for the linear style of Zelda games. It's just not the focus right now. But I do feel the contrast between the more linear and open world style of Zelda is very interesting. I think they both have their pros and cons from a development standpoint. The more linear style of games are going to have less control for the player and more control for the developers. The developers will ensure that the player sees and does whatever they want them to do whenever they want them to do it. And the pros of this is a better pacing throughout, a much easier to distribute and digest narrative. In a linear style game, there's a very distinct and obvious beginning, middle, and end, whereas open world is kind of just all over the place. We don't know how they're going to do it in Tears of the Kingdom quite yet, but I'm sure the developers have a much easier time giving a good story in a linear style game. And dungeons in a linear style Zelda game can be more structured and focused, usually basing itself around one or two items or abilities that Link has. Same goes for the mini and final bosses. Whereas something in an open world game, they had to give Link all of his abilities at the very beginning and base every puzzle and dungeon around those 4 abilities. Again, just basing this off of Breath of the Wild, we don't know everything they're going to do in Tears of the Kingdom quite yet. But as I mentioned, the open world style of Zelda is much more sandboxy. There's a lot more player-led experiences. You start the game and you can go in any direction, which was one of the greatest strengths of Breath of the Wild and likely to be Tears of the Kingdom. The developers are going to have far less control here. They have no way of predicting where the player is going to go, when they're going to be at certain spots. And a negative to this is what we saw in Breath of the Wild and their story. A lot of people did not like the fact that you pretty much fleshed out the story by finding certain areas on the map that, triggered Link's memories to come back to him. But at the time, that was probably just the best option. But based on general trends that I see online, I feel like a lot of people would love a meshing of the two, essentially. Again, we don't know everything about Tears of the Kingdom yet, so maybe this happens in the sequel to Breath of the Wild. But if they could somehow incorporate legacy-style dungeons, maybe you find some iconic items at the beginning of a dungeon and get to use it throughout. Give these dungeons more specific themes and designs, and find a way to present the story that's a bit more satisfying. And I think you may have the greatest Zelda game on your hands ever. So another important angle to look at here is the cost and time of development. Prior to Tears of the Kingdom, the longest period without a mainline Zelda game was about 5 years, and that was between A Link to the Past and Ocarina of Time. Now, it makes perfect sense why that would be the case. They are transitioning from 2D to 3D on the Nintendo 64 for the first time ever. They needed to make sure everything worked properly, looked well, controlled well for Ocarina of Time. So it makes sense that that would be kind of the largest gap in the series. So then you look at Tears of the Kingdom. That game started development in 2017, almost immediately after Breath of the Wild, and that game took 6 years to create. Despite the fact that they're using the same engine, graphic style, assets from Breath of the Wild, I think it's safe to assume that the Zelda team will have added enough content into Tears of the Kingdom to justify that 6-year development cycle. But it just goes to show that the larger the scope, the bigger the ideas, the longer it's going to take. And so you need to ask yourself, would you be okay with 6-year gaps in between every mainline Zelda release? But to play devil's advocate, I'm sure Nintendo has no problem at all continuing to develop these open world games if the profits are worth it. And I do want to give a quick shout out to someone who replied on the initial Twitter poll. This is Nishquick saying, "The numbers don't lie. Breath of the Wild has sold 3 times the highest selling traditional Zelda. Only us longtime fans will be pleased with a linear traditional game, and I'd honestly miss the open air vibe. I think a balance between both sides, like how Tears of the Kingdom might do it, would be perfect." I think all of that is very well said, and he makes a very good point that Breath of the Wild sold 3 times more than the highest selling traditional Zelda games. So I'm sure Nintendo, being the business that they are, looked at that and said, yeah, let's keep it going. Another aspect to think about is potential value of a product. You know, games are getting more and more expensive. Tears of the Kingdom itself is going to be $70, which is a new frontier for Nintendo. But because of these increased costs, people want more bang for their buck. And you look at your typical linear traditional Zelda game, that'll probably net you 15 to 25 hours of entertainment, unless you want to replay it, but it's got a beginning and an end, and then you're done. Look at Breath of the Wild. People have made new lives in that game. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours of entertainment, time spent. So yeah, people are going to value that experience a lot more. I think another important take here is that Nintendo will likely always have a B team working on ports of older Zelda titles, or maybe the 2D Zelda games, something a little bit less development heavy, more cost effective. And as long as they do that, I mean, I think I would be pretty happy. But as an enjoyer of the traditional style games, one thing that worries me is that if the game after Tears of the Kingdom is yet another big open world adventure, I mean, that'll be very cool, but it will set a precedence for the Zelda fan base that, hey, we are going forward, we're doubling down, tripling down even on the open world concepts, and we're kind of leaving these linear, more traditional style Zelda games in the past. Whereas if the next game after Tears of the Kingdom is a traditional style, that will be sending a message telling everybody that, hey, we haven't forgotten about these traditional style games, and you can continue to expect them here and there. I feel like I would like a rotation of some sort, that, hey, like we get an open world game, then we get a traditional style, then we get a 2D, then we get an open world, then traditional, then 2D, and kind of just, you know, mix and match, play around with that. Obviously, it doesn't have to go exactly in that order or anything, but if they, like I said, triple down on the open world concept, that's sending a message to everybody that, hey, this is the future of Zelda, and it is going to continue on for the foreseeable future. And I know I keep flopping back and forth here because I look at what I just said and I say, oh, that doesn't seem like the worst thing in the world either. You know, for over 30 years, we've gotten the traditional style of Zelda. So, God forbid we get a couple of decades of straight open world Zelda adventures. As long as they can keep building on top of the last and keep making them interesting and innovative, then that's totally fine. So, who am I to say that open world Zelda can't have its time in the sun? So that begs the question, where do I stand on all of this? Frankly, yeah, they should probably continue the open world stuff. It's financially beneficial, and these games are so great. And yes, I know we've not played Tears of the Kingdom yet, but come on, that game looks fantastic. Oh man, can you imagine though if Tears of the Kingdom isn't good? What if it comes out and it totally flops and everyone hates it? We'd have to revisit this entire conversation. What a timeline that would be. But yeah, if we can get some more unique legacy-style dungeons incorporated into open-world Zelda, I think I'll be a happy camper. On top of that, if we continue to get some 2D and some past Zelda games ported to modern consoles, we're good to go. But definitely don't stop the 2D Zelda games, Nintendo, please. I'm getting kind of worried over here. I love 2D Zelda. My favorite Zelda game is The Legend of Zelda Minish Cap, which you can play on NSO right now, by the way. I just hope they don't just stray so far into open world that they just never go back to 2D Zelda, because it does hold a special place in my heart, but that's just me. Guys, I think that's all I've got to talk about here today. Please leave down in the comments below, what would you prefer to see for the next Zelda entry after Tears of the Kingdom? A more linear, traditional style Zelda, or do you want them to continue the open world design that they have going for them right now? And feel free to comment on everything else I said throughout the course of this video. Like, subscribe, share it around, and I'll catch you on the next one. Peace.